Hello everybody, this is Burak Güzel and welcome to another episode of CodeIgniter from Scratch. This will be episode 17 and our subject will be how to get around without using query strings. If you have done a lot of PHP programming, you know you use query strings and the get array quite a bit. And a lot of websites use them, but we're using a framework that encourages the use of URI segments and kind of discourages the query strings, even though it does have support for it. For the sake of being consistent, let's try to get things done without relying on query strings. For example, on a website like NetTuts, you could search for a keyword on the search form here, and you'll see the results page will have this in the URL. This is a query string. So if you use pagination on top of this, now for example, this website has a combination of URI segments and a query string, which doesn't look so bad. But let's say you have a more complicated form with multiple search options. You'll start adding on more and more into the URL for every single option. Um, So let's try to keep our URLs short, pretty, and without query strings. So we're going to continue from the last episode where we had a page where we listed movies, and we're going to add a search form, and the search results page will be paginated, sortable still, and the URL will not have query strings, and it will not be crazy long, adding a lot of stuff for each field. So let's see how we can accomplish this today. Since we're going to add a form, this is where we left off. This was what it looked like last time. So since we're going to add a form on top of this, let's go ahead and open the view file and start adding some form helper functions. So let's open our form. And since I know you guys know these functions already, I'm going to try to go fast. So I'm pointing the form to a controller method search, which doesn't exist yet. Um, and let's have an input field inside of a div with a label. And let's call it title so that people can use this field to search for movie titles. And have a form input below this. Gonna have the name of title, the default value. As usual, we're gonna use the set value function, so it displays the value that user just submitted, and it will have an ID of title to match the label. Now let's have a second type of input here, and let's make it a drop down. So we're gonna have category search. Categories are preset, so there's only a set number of categories, which makes the drop down option suitable. Category, and we need to have a second parameter here for the category options, and I'm just gonna put a variable here that doesn't exist yet. So we're supposed to carry every single category from the database into here, make it use that for building the drop down. Now let's have another kind of input. Well, this will be a combination of the two. So it will have, let's call it length. I just copy pasted this one because I'm going to use both a drop down and an input. Let's copy this input as well. Length. I'm going to explain what this is in a second. So we're going to have a field called length. It will have a drop down, and the drop down options will be like less than, greater than, equals, and then there will be an input for the length. So you will be able to search for movies that are, let's say, more than 100 minutes long. Um, and the values here will be, let's start with greater than greater than or equals. These are just the standard comparison operators, and have EQ for equals, less than or equals to as that, LT, or less than. I added these three things here. This one is a combo. And before we get further, let's show you what it looks like. Refresh. There's an error obviously because of this category options variable is not defined yet. So we have the title, we have the category. This will be a drop down with categories. Then we have length, and length with these comparison operators and a number you can enter in this field. So you can search by a range of some sort. So let's populate this category options, or before that, let's add a submit button. So the form is complete. Form submit. Let's call it action. And a little bit of CSS for these labels. So I want to populate these category options. And the best way for that is go to the controller, and towards the end here I'm gonna pass it category options, and I want to obtain it from the model because it's gonna require some database operations. Film model category options. So this should return me an array of categories, and let's go to the models to implement this. Now in the database there's a table called category that has all these categories, and we're going to search the film list table with these categories, and we're going to search by this text name of the category because there's no category ID, just a full category name. So in the category table I only am interested in the name. I'm not interested in getting the IDs. So let's write the query. A simple select name from category and get the results, and stored in a variable called rows. So I'm going to return an array. So let's write that line first. Category options. This will be the array I'm going to return. And to populate this, I'm going to start with a array that has a blank option, because by default I want the drop down menu to have a blank option, and after that blank option I want to add the other options. So go through the rows by just using for each, and the index will be the category name, and the value also will be category name, because that's how our drop down is going to be. We're not going to have IDs or anything. So this should return it, this should pass it along, and this should generate the drop down. If you refresh, you'll see the form is done. Inputs are here, categories are displaying, the length comparison is displaying, and you can put a number here. So now let's talk about how we're going to make this search form functional. As you know, the form by default is a post form. So every data I enter in these fields become part of the post array, and I get it in my application. So this goes to films/search. So it will be in this films controller a method called search. So everything comes here, And here I have access to these form fields data that was posted. And now I gotta perform the search on the table, get the limited results from based on the search, and I want to have pagination. That means these links have to carry those with them. So the links have to know that which data was submitted in the form. So how do we do that? You can either use query strings or you can use some tricks to get around it. And for example, if you're using URL segments, you can try adding more and more segments, and each segment representing each field of the form. But that just gets worse and worse the bigger the form is. So we're gonna have something else. I'm gonna call it query ID. So it will be part of the URL, and it will come right after film/display/ some ID number. So this number will represent what data was posted. So this number will also be in the database. That's how it's going to point to that form data. And that form data will be saved just like a query string in the database. So we'll have a table that contains two columns. One is the query ID and one is the query string. So for every different performed search, there will be a different row, and that search will be represented with that ID number in the URL. And that way we can keep carrying that number on the pagination links, so it just keeps going, and you can send the link to somebody else, and then when they click the link, they can see the same search results, because now it remembers what the form fields were based on that ID number called query ID. So I'm gonna start adding this field or this URI segment in the controller. I'm gonna have it as the first URI segment. So I'm inserting it here, query ID, and give it a default of 0. And I'm gonna assume 0 means no query, so it's the default page, no form submission when it's 0. So then what I need to do is for the display part of it, I have to get that ID, get the corresponding data, and pass that data to the model's search function so that it searches based on that. So if I, for example, chose action as a category, that array would have a value of category action that will go into the search function, and then the search function will query the database only searching for those movies. So this is going to take several steps. So let's get started by implementing this search function first. To get the posted form values, as you know, we just used this input post, and let's say we're fetching the title field. We do that. But let's build an array with all the form fields values. So I'll call it query array equals array, and here have, let's say, title equals this, and do the same for all the other ones. So we have category in the form, we have the length comparison drop-down field, and we have the length field. So this data is going to be represented by a query ID, as I said. So I have to turn this data into an ID, query ID. And once I do that, I can redirect the user to film/display/ that query ID. So what's going to generate that? What's going to do all that work? Since we already have an input library in the CodeIgniter, we can just expand on it. We don't have to create a new library. We don't have to create models, controllers. We can just extend the library and make it do these things for us. So I'm going to eventually extend the library, and in the input library I'm going to have a function called save query. So it will take that data, save it to the database, and return the ID for that row. So that is represented in the URL, and we go back. When the redirection happens, now this has a query ID based on the search, and we gotta load that data from the database. This input again could have a function called load query, and based on that query ID we can just fetch it from the database. And I'm not going to return it as an array. I'm actually going to load it into the get array. So the get array is, as you know, the query string array. So all that data will almost behave like part of a query string that actually doesn't exist, but it will act like it exists. So we have to implement it that way. Here I can copy paste this. Okay, after we loaded it, we can build the array again, the query array. And instead of this input post, I'm going to use this input get. Again, I'm just doing this without having implemented all this input library stuff. This is my goal. So I want to have the query ID in the URL, and based on that, I want to build a virtual query string. So now I can start accessing it by using this input get title, this input get category. So we can still keep using the input libraries like cross-site scripting, filtering options, and whatnot. So I don't directly access the get array. I will access it through the input library, just like we do it for the post array. We don't directly access the post array. We go through the input library so that if there's any filtering or form validation stuff being done, then it goes through the proper places. And finally, that query array should get posted or sent to the film model search function so that it searches the database based on that array. Now, let's start implementing all this stuff that we assumed it's going to work, like the load query function and save query function. Let's start by implementing the save query. So since we're expanding on the input library, go into your applications libraries folder and create a new file called my input. Now this is how we extend a library, a core library. CI input is the library we're extending. So, okay, the function I'm adding is save query, which gets that query array and saves it in the database. Before that, we gotta have the table. So let's have a table called CI query. In this database, I'm just gonna go right CI query with two fields. One will be the ID, and one will be the query string. ID will be integer, primary, auto increment, and query string will be just text. And save. Now we can start using that table. So it's going to insert. You would insert like this db insert into the CI query table, and we're going to set the query string field to something. And I'm going to use a PHP function here called HTTP build query. This takes an array and turns it into a query string format. So we pass query array, and it will actually turn into a query string. So we can save it as a string in the database. But we cannot do this. We gotta use the super global or it's called super object, I believe, the CI object, because we're not inside of a controller, we are outside, so we have to get the CI object and then access the database through that. Once that's done, we gotta return the ID of the new saved record. So we just call insert ID function. Now this will return this ID field. Now let's see if this is working. So in my controller, I'm not going to do anything. Okay, let's just see if it's working. In the form, let's put title, like I'm going to put airplane, action, length at least 50 minutes, and I hit search. Okay, there's an error because of the load query function is fatal. But we already called the save query function, I believe, before the redirect. So it must have been saved in the database. So let's see if that part is working. Alright, so it saved the record. The first record is ID1. I'm going to look at the whole text. And as you can see, it formed a query string because of the HTTP build query function. This turned the array into a query string. And then now we have an invisible sort of query string, and we can refer to it with a query ID of 1. And then we can keep carrying this ID and have access to this query string and use that in the search results. So saving is done. Let's do the loading part. Load query. Again, we got to access the database, so I'm going to do the same thing. Get instance of the CI object, and this will be a select. I can just use a shortcut function, get where, just provide the table name and your search parameters. So we'll search by ID, we'll search by query ID, and get the results, and rows. And I'm only interested in the query string. Actually, yeah, if it's found, if it's not found, I'm not going to do anything, so I put a conditional. And here I'm going to run the reverse function of HTTP build query, which is again a PHP function called parse str. What this does is takes a query string, so here rows 0 query string, and puts it into an array, and you've got to put that as the second parameter. I'm going to put in the get array. So I'll take the query string and break it down into an array, a get array. So now the application will act as if there's a query string and then the get array has those values, so it will make it easy for us to access them. So this is how it's going to be able to access here it's going to be able to do this input get and access the get array and get the data. Let's refresh this. There's an error. Oh, it's because of the change we did here. So now I assume the query array is being populated properly. So I'm going to test that. I'm just going to put a print r query array just for debugging and return, refresh. You see the query. So based on this query ID of 1, we can make more of them. Like I'll put another tests comedy 1 2 3. Now the query ID becomes 2. So based on this ID, it loaded the query string and it put it in the get array, and then we populated this query array, and then query array contents are right here. So far it's working, and now we're passing it to the search function, and we're going to make the search function use those. So go to the model. In the search function, we're adding that parameter. It's called query array again. Now we have two queries. One was for getting the results, one was for getting the total count, and we gotta add some conditions to both of them. Here, after we do select from, limit, order by, and then we can start adding the where clauses. Unlike regular SQL, you can add the where clause after putting limit, order by. It doesn't matter as long as you do it before calling get. So if you do, like, let's check for title. So if there was a title, this should be brackets. I'm using strlen because if, instead of isSet, because the array index might be there, but it might be empty. So I'm just going to check for if the string has anything in it. So if the query array title has anything in it, I'm gonna search. I'm gonna put a like instead of where because I want to have a flexible search. So I'm gonna search the title column with that. Similarly for category, let's copy that. So if the category was searched for, we search the category. This time we can put where instead of like. Category. So the next thing was length. So if there's a length, well, this will be a little more code. It will be a where. It will do the length field, but it will also have an operator. So, you know, normally it would be something like greater than equals, comma, and the value. But this will be the operator that's also being passed in the form. So I'll just call it operator, and the operators are, it's actually the same array as the one in the view, this array. So use that. Because the values that are passed are like GT, GTE, EQ, we gotta translate them into the actual operators. So the operator is basically operators and that value, which is length comparison. So that's how we get the operator, which could be any of these, and we put that in the where clause, and then we put the value. So we did all of them, but we also do the same thing for the count query. So I'm going to copy paste. It's going to be a little bit of code duplication, but it's okay. I will put it here again before the get. So it will do it on both queries. I just straight up copied it. It's because I called both of them Q, so the code is exactly the same. Now we can, I believe we can refresh. Yeah, well, we searched for stuff that didn't match anything. So let me just search. If we don't search for anything, we got 1,000 results. Let's search for length, for example, 100 minutes or more. Search. We got 607 movies. The query ID is in the URL, which is great. And then you got pagination. Oh, we gotta fix the pagination links, I believe. Also, here it should be isSet instead of just a regular condition, so we don't get the notice. In the controller, that's right. Since now the query ID is in the URL, we gotta make sure that it's in the pagination URLs. So after films display, got query ID slash and the segment for the offset will be 6 instead of 5 because we added one more segment here. So let's refresh. The error is gone. We're looking at page. So we've got to go back, do the search again. Okay, we have the query ID of 4 in the URL, and now if you click on any of the pages, like page 3, got 4, sorting by title, ascending order, and offset is 40. Third page of the results of 607 films. Let's search for something else. Action, length, again 100, and title, something in the title, like airplane. No, that didn't match anything. Search for air, action, also didn't find anything. Animation, found 66 movies. I'll pick something from here. Club, so club, animation, fixed, found only one, and now the pagination disappeared because we had a condition on it from last episode. Okay, now we have one more thing to resolve, and that is these fields need to be repopulated based on what we searched for, and that's simple. In the view, you'll see, remember that we use the set value. This is supposed to do that, but it's not doing it. It's because it's only checking for post values. It's not checking for get values. So what I'm going to do is extend the helper. So if you go into the helper, create a new file called my form helper, and we can add code to fix that. Go into the system folder, look at the helpers and form helper, and here you should find the set value function. I'll copy paste that. Okay, so what we're doing is we extended the form helper in our applications helpers folder, and I'm going to override this function. This function is responsible for getting the input that the user entered, but it's only checking the post array. So I can change this code a little bit. First, let me rewrite this code. It says if it's not set, just return the default, otherwise then check the post. I can reverse that, so saying if it is set, return that, otherwise return default. And we can add an additional one here. If it's set in the get array, return that. So now we have an extra condition. It will check both post and get, and otherwise it will fall back to the default. So now that we overwrote this, or extended this rather, if you refresh, you'll see the stuff is here again. So let me do another search. Games, at least 60. Search. I got 60 results. The form fields are populated correctly. The pagination is working. I can even sort the results by, well, sorting is not working. Okay, that's one more thing you gotta fix. That's in the view again. Again, we changed the URL structure, so we gotta change these links. We got films, display. This was the links for the cells here, the header cells. So I gotta add the query ID in the link here. And since this is the view, the query ID has to be passed from the controller. I'll actually do it on top somewhere. Data query ID. Okay. Let's go back, refresh the results. Now I got results. I can click this. Now the results are sorted, and I can paginate. And as I click the pages, it's still preserving the results, preserving the sorting, preserving the form inputs. So now you got a nice searchable form with pagination, with sorting, uh, and the URL is not messed up. All it has is this one extra field that represents the query ID. In this case is like 9. So in the database, if you browse your CI query table, you can see that this ID of 9 has that query string. So it's sort of hidden from the user. So now you have nice URLs that don't have too many parameters. Even if you have 20 form fields, you will still have only one ID to represent your search parameters. And you can then give the same link to somebody else on the for the search results, and they will see the same results on the same page with the same sorting order, and they will even see the parameters you put into the form fields. It will populate them for them. So this was a method I came up with, coded on my own. Other people might have come up with the same idea or different ideas to keep their URLs clean and nice. So let me know if you found it interesting and usable. And I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.